to make a statement.
Good evening. Welcome to the University of Tennessee. For those of you who are not students, faculty, or staff, we want to welcome you to our university. For those of you who are students, faculty, and staff, welcome to a great night where we hope we'll have a spirited debate. Tonight's event has been organized by University of Tennessee Registered Student Organization for the engagement of our campus community. As a public university, our campus is a marketplace of ideas. The university embraces debate and will protect the freedom of our campus community to vigorously discuss ideas. We ask that you respect the speaker, the students who organize the event, and fellow students and other members gathered in attendance, and allow the speaker to be heard. University policy, as well as state law, prohibits substantial obstruction or interference with this event. Those who attempt to interrupt the speaker or otherwise prevent him from speaking will be asked to leave the facility and may be subject to disciplinary action if you are a university student, faculty, or staff member, or legal action if you are a member of our community. Thank you for your cooperation.
My name is Jordan Vines, and I'm the chair of our chapter, which was founded in 2013 under Michael Hensley. Under Young America's Foundation and in association with chapters across the United States, we pride ourselves on advocating for the ideas of limited government, individual freedom, free enterprise, traditional values, and a strong national defense. With these values in mind, our goal is to serve as the premier organization for young conservatives and for the conservative movement through campus programming and speaking events. We are excited to host Ben Shapiro, which would not have been possible without Young America's Foundation and Mr. Fred Allen, who sponsored tonight's lecture. We would also like to thank the University of Tennessee for its support, as well as members from the Republican Jewish Coalition of Knoxville, including Dr. Aaron Margulies, Dr. Glenn Myers, Dr. Jeffrey Lang, Mrs. Heather Lang, and Rabbi Wilhelm. To all the students and community members present tonight, we thank you for joining us. Now more than ever, it is critical that we create an environment on campus that values the free and open exchange of ideas. Our diverse views should be celebrated, as we are fortunate to live in a country founded on the important idea of free expression. Tonight's event is a positive step in that direction. We hope to foster an educational debate, giving students the opportunity to hear a conservative perspective on issues of national importance. Ben Shapiro is the editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire and host of The Ben Shapiro Show, the top conservative podcast in the nation. Shapiro is the author of 7 nonfiction books, including the New York Times bestseller Bullies: How the Left's Culture of Fear and Intimidation Silences America. Shapiro was hired by Creators Syndicate at age 17 to become the youngest nationally syndicated columnist in the U.S. He earned a BA
Sorry to
in
interrupt.
political science
The
from
mic will
UCLA
be
in
fixed soon.
2004
Just an
and graduated
FYI,
from
yelling
Harvard
about
Law
it in
School
chat won't
2007.
make it be fixed any
After
faster.
working as an attorney for Goodwin Procter LLP, Shapiro began his own legal consulting firm, Benjamin Shapiro Legal Consulting, in Los Angeles. Ben Shapiro's columns are printed in major newspapers and websites across the country. He has appeared on hundreds of radio and television shows around the nation and is widely known as a conservative powerhouse, with a reputation for his bold and unapologetic commentary. Since he began writing his first book, Brainwashed: How Universities Indoctrinate America's Youth, Shapiro has frequently addressed the issue of the left's ideological stranglehold on academia and has worked to push back against the trend through fact and logic-based speeches and debates. He has appeared as the featured speaker at many conservative events on campuses nationwide, several of those appearances targeted by progressive and Antifa activists. Shapiro, an Orthodox Jew, has also worked to expose the anti-Israel and anti-Semitic motivations behind the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ben Shapiro.
So much.
What
Well,
the
thank you.
fuck happened?
It's nice to be in a place with no riots, and I only saw about a dozen police officers, not 400, so that was exciting. And I did promise the police officers who are not here on overtime that we would try to keep to the time limits that they can go home. But I want to start by, I was just going to launch right into the speech. First, of course, I want to thank Young America's Foundation for sponsoring the event and the local chapter of YAF for doing such a wonderful job getting the word out. And if there are people on the other side, people of the left, if you could raise your hands, I'd like to give you a round of applause for coming, because I appreciate it. Well, thank you. Now I want to do that because then I'm going to mock you, but that's just the way this goes. That's part of the story. So in the name of that, I was just going to launch in my speech, but I was handed this pamphlet from the Young Democratic Socialists, all about how capitalism really hasn't done anything for us. I mean, I can tell you one thing capitalism would do for you: it'd get you some better graphic design. I do like some of the facts that are in here. Things like, have you ever wondered why there are 5 times as many empty houses as there are homeless people in the United States? Well, I've never really wondered that, because the people who are building those empty houses are hoping to sell those empty houses, presumably. If you want to see places that are full, there are prison camps in North Korea. And as far as the homeless problem in the United States, it would be remiss not to acknowledge that homelessness is highly linked, unfortunately, to mental illness. So if we're going to talk about the homeless problem, it has far less to do with the availability of housing and far more to do with the fact that we have not done enough in terms of caring for the mentally ill. And it says, have you ever wondered why we waste over 133 billion pounds of food, 30 to 40% of the food supply each year, when people still go hungry? I actually had not wondered that ever since I was 5, and my mother said to me, if you don't eat that food, someone in China will starve. And I figured that is not true. If I don't eat this food, then that person in China will have just as little food as that person would have had otherwise, unless you can freeze-dry this sucker and send it over there. And speaking of food shortages, has anybody ever wondered why it is that everyone in Ukraine from like 1930 to 1933 had none of it? It has more to do with socialism than with capitalism. And it says, have you ever wondered why just 8 men own as much wealth as the other half of the world? I haven't really wondered that either, since capitalism has raised literally half the globe from abject poverty since 1980. And it turns out that those people who are enormously wealthy have generated more wealth for more people than have virtually anyone else on the planet. And says, have I ever wondered why college students are saddled with the burdens of debt so they can become qualified? I have, and I also wonder why you would spend money to come to a college so you could learn nothing and put out garbage like this. That seems like a waste of money. My favorite part of this pamphlet is actually this particular page right here, where it says, did you know? And then there's a picture of Albert Einstein and a picture of Martin Luther King and a picture of Helen Keller. And it says, did you know Einstein, Martin Luther King Jr., and Helen Keller were socialists? I figured they did that because it wouldn't look as good if it said, did you know that Stalin, Mao, Hugo Chavez, and Castro were socialists? It turns out that being a socialist in America, which has not embraced socialism, is a really lucrative and nice thing. You can become famous, you can become rich, you can become well-known without ever having to implement any of your ideas. So that's convenient. Okay, so now to the actual speech. So I want to do something a little bit different tonight. Normally, I launch right into my normal diatribe about white privilege and why it's nonsense and why people are not victims. But I want to talk about a little bit of deeper philosophy today. I want to do something different, because I figure a lot of people in the room have probably seen some of my other speeches. And so I want to do, this is the first run, this is a test run for a new sort of speech that I want to give tonight. And that is, I want to talk about some of the deeper philosophical roots of why we are so split in the country. One of the things that has really become clear to me personally is just how split we are. I mean, when I have to go on a campus and people have to spend $600,000 just so that I can talk. When we are having knockdown, drag-out fights over really nothings in terms of politics. I mean, the differentiation between the Republican Party on DACA and the Democratic Party on DACA are pretty much nil at this point, and yet we are having knockdown, drag-out fights over this. And a lot of it has to do with the idea that we just ascribe bad motives to one another. So I want to get a couple of things out of the way so that we can talk about what's really separating us. Can we have a quick show of hands? Who here in this room who's conservative thinks black people are genetically inferior? Okay, for those who can't see on camera, that is 0 hands, right? Who here in this room who is conservative feels that women are inherently less qualified for job positions? Okay, no hands go up. Who here in this room believes that poor people are inherently evil and deserve to suffer? No hands. Okay, so now we can get all of those motives out of the way, because those motives have now been ascribed repeatedly to everybody on my side of the aisle. Right? These motives are constantly ascribed to people on my side of the aisle. We're racist, sexist, bigot, homophobes, we hate gay people, and we hate black people, and we hate women, and none of this is true. So here's the question. Why are we having these battles where we ascribe these sort of motives to one another? And I think that it goes to something a little bit deeper than just your everyday politics. I think something really devastating has happened to the West, and it's come to America over the last few decades, but in the West over the last couple of hundred years. And that is, we no longer in this country, and in the West at large, have a common vision of meaning. We no longer really even share a society, because we don't share a vision of what the country ought to be. So let's go back to serious basics. What exactly is the meaning of life? Okay, what is the meaning of being a person? What's the meaning of existing in a society together? What are we striving for? What are we trying to do together? Because if we can't agree on that, it's going to be very difficult for us to agree on things as simple as ascribing decent motives to one another. So let's start at the root. Okay, not the Howard Zinn version of America where all the founders were evil, trying to protect their own private property. That's ahistorical and untrue. Okay, let's start from the actual root of what America is all about. And that, of course, is the idea of the pursuit of happiness. But Jefferson and Thomas Jefferson and the rest of the founders, when they said pursuit of happiness, they didn't just mean the right to get your rocks off and smoke pot in your dorm room. Okay, what they meant was something actually rather specific. They thought about happiness and the pursuit of happiness in terms of an Aristotelian notion of fulfilling your goal. Reason is what is going to endow you with a life of happiness and meaning. Judeo-Christian values teach us that we have individual meaning, right? It teaches us we are made in the image of God. We are all individually valuable. This is what equality means in the conservative perspective, in the founding perspective. Not that we're all equally able, not that we all are equally capable of performing certain activities. Because I'm never going to play football. I'm never going to be a ball. Like, it's never going to happen, right? But that does not mean that I'm not equal to Peyton Manning in God's sense. Okay, the fact is that according to the Bible, the key provision of all of Western thought lies in Genesis 1:26, the idea that each of us and every one of us is made in the image of God. Okay, that is the first fundamental basis of Western civilization. And the second fundamental basis of Western civilization comes from Athens, right? It comes from Greek thought, which suggests that the best way to act virtuously is to use reason instead of feeling. And that one of our jobs is to help train our feelings to move in accordance with our reason. And if we're not reasoning, if we're not using logic, if we're not using facts, then we're doing something wrong. We're not, animals have feelings. Babies have feelings. You, as an adult human being, you have reason. The founders believe both of these things. They believe that happiness lay in believing both of these things. That you have a job on this earth, and that is to, in the Judeo-Christian system, follow God by acknowledging the value of other human beings, and in the Athenian value system, by becoming a better person through introspection and self-training. Right? Founders believe both of these things. George Washington summed it up well. He said, the consideration that human happiness and moral duty are inseparably connected will always continue to prompt me to promote the progress of the former by inculcating the practice of the latter. So it wasn't just that the founders shared a goal. They also had a plan for getting it. There are basically four things that you need in order to pursue happiness in the way that the founders wanted us all to pursue happiness and felt that all human beings should pursue happiness. The first one is individual purpose. We all have to have a purpose for living. Right? If you don't have a purpose, you're going to be depressed. You're going to live a sad life. Individual purpose is heavily connected with living. Second, individual capacity. You have to believe that you are in control of your destiny. Not society, not your genetics, you. You, as a free, independent human being, have the capacity to make your life better. Third, you have to have a communal purpose. Right? We're social beings. We exist with each other. And we have to feel like we're all part of the same fight. You have to feel like we're all fighting together for something better. And finally, you need communal capacity. You have to feel like the community is actually moving us towards this communal purpose. So as I say, we need individual purpose because without individual purpose, life becomes meaningless. Right? This is what, again, Aristotle and the Bible provide, is this notion that you as an individual living on a desert island, you still have a purpose. Your purpose is to reason. Your purpose is to worship God. Your purpose is to become a better human being, right? You have an individual purpose apart from what other people want of you. Now, in our society, we've sort of tossed this out in favor of this idea that individualism is about pursuit of pleasure, whatever floats your boat, whatever I define liberty as, whatever I want to do. And you can do all those things. That's fine. But the idea that an entire society can be based on the pursuit of individual pleasure is just not true, which is, of course, why John Adams suggested that a constitutional free republic could only be based on a moral and religious people and no one else. Okay, but it's not enough to just have purpose. We have to believe that we can achieve that purpose. We have to believe that we can achieve our goals. If we don't believe that, we tend to give up. We get depressed. We sit the battles out. Unfortunately, on this one, too, there's been a big fight against the notion of individual capacity. I'll discuss that in a second. Right? In order for you to believe that you have capacity, you have to believe that you have the capacity for reason. You have to believe certain basic assumptions that you never think about. Like you are an actual individual human being, not just a cluster of cells that changes every day. You're an individual human being who makes decisions on a day-to-day basis, and then you're responsible for those decisions using something called reason. Right? These are all assumptions, as we'll see in a second, that have been ripped out from under us. Okay, third, you need a communal purpose. We all have to get together and decide what we want to do together. We have communities striving to better the world. This is why Jefferson talked about America as an empire of liberty. We have certain values we are seeking to promote together. And that's why we build a country together, so that we can promote those values among ourselves and to other people. And finally, we need communal capacity. We need a balance between a community that believes in values and a community that allows us to exercise our free will to pursue those values. Right? We don't want a theocracy where the government just forces you to do things, but we also don't want an anarchic system where we have no social safety net whatsoever in terms of our support for one another, and anything can be taken away from you at any time. Okay, so to recap very briefly, individual purpose, individual capacity, communal purpose, communal capacity. These are the four things you need to pursue happiness. And the left has torn each one of these four things down. I don't just mean the American left, I mean the Marxist left. You know, the folks who promote democratic socialism have their roots in Marx. Marx opposed each of these notions, at least in the founding version of them. It goes back even further than Marx. If you go to people like David Hume, there are philosophers for 400 years who have been claiming that aspects of each of these four things have to be taken away. First, individual purpose. So the left believes there is no individual purpose that is universal to all of us. We don't all have the same individual purpose, right? As human beings, we don't have a better version of human beings we're trying to turn into. There is no Aristotelian pursuit of virtue. There's just whatever I want today. My individual purpose is whatever I want today, which basically leaves us alone in a godless universe striving to lash out and make a way for ourselves, right? It's sort of Jean-Paul Sartre existentialism. Problem is, again, you build a society based on this, and what you end up with is a very chaotic, confused lot of people. Don't have anything in common, because we're all so self-existent, so narcissistic, focused on ourselves all the time. It's very difficult to live in society with one another, and we tend to attribute the best motives to ourselves and the worst motives to everybody else. Right? We tend to think that my individual purpose is the best individual purpose, but your individual purpose sucks. And so if they're in conflict, it's not because we don't share an individual purpose, it's because mine is right and yours is wrong, even if I can't argue why mine is right or yours is wrong. Second, individual capacity. This one the left has really taken on. The idea that you are capable of making decisions. Every single aspect of this one has been taken on by the left. First of all, the idea of scientific materialism rips away. It rips away at the very heart of identity. You as an individual human being capable of acting in the world. If you're a scientific determinist, then you tend to believe that all human activity is traceable to neurons firing in your brain or the environment around you. Right? That's what human beings are. We're just a set of chemicals and neurons and biological functions. That's all we are. Well, then you can't act in the universe, right? How are you supposed to better yourself? It's an oxymoron. You can't better yourself. Right? You're not even you. You're just a thing. You're a ball of meat floating around in this universe. Right? You're not important. You have no inherent value. There's no such thing as reason, by the way, in this version. Reason is just a social construct. Reason is just one set of neurons firing as opposed to a different set of neurons firing. Okay, so this neuron fires in your prefrontal cortex. Well, why is that any better than the neurons firing in your amygdala? What difference does it make? You do not have capacity to move. And then the Marxist left takes it even further. They say that society defines you. I mean, it says so right here in this special pamphlet that I saw, actually. It says right here in this special pamphlet, when it says common myths about socialism, truth, social circumstances affect behaviors, right? And the Marxist thought is that human beings become better because of the social circumstances in which they find themselves. That if we just change society around you, there's no such thing as human nature. You are just going to be the after effect of whatever nature and society create around you. This is not likely to give you a feeling of verve about getting up in the morning. Right? You're basically getting kicked around like a soccer ball by the universe. Enjoy. Right? You are now Spinoza's rock floating through space with the self-awareness to understand that you weren't actually, you didn't throw yourself, that you've just been thrown and you're kind of floating around and that's it. Okay, third, communal purpose. So the left has substituted new communal purposes for the old communal purposes. So the old communal purpose was the idea that we as a society are going to make it easier for you to be virtuous by granting you the freedom to act in accordance with virtue, but also setting certain social standards outside of government that inculcate virtue in individual citizens, right? This is the John Adams vision of what the community is supposed to do. Not theocracy and not anarchy, but a society that provides you the freedom to explore your own virtue while creating systems outside of government that help promote that, right? That was the idea of the communal purpose. And doing that as much as we can all over the world, depending on the cost, right? The left has substituted utopian communal purpose, because Aristotle and the Bible no longer exist in this world. So instead of that, what we get are these various utopian schemes. Right? You get communism. We'll just redistribute all the property and everything will be all better. You as an individual no longer matter, because why should you? I mean, again, you're a ball of meat, so what difference does it make? If you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet, well, utopia's on the way. Social institutions that exist based on these old values, they have to be torn out root and branch to make way for something new. And the left, in its desire to create these new communities, has created this intersectional hierarchy where we are no longer members of a common community with a common set of values. Now we can be identified by our biological features, which is very exciting. Right? You're no longer a human being who's an individual with thoughts and purposes. You are now a member of a community and only a member of a community. You're a member of the black community. You're a member of the white community. You're a member of the Asian community. And what's more, because the society is unfair, we can actually determine how valuable your perspective is based on which membership in which group you belong. And this is intersectionality. So as I've said before, there's a hierarchy. So if you're LGBT, you're at the very top, your opinion matters most because you've been most victimized. Then comes black people, then comes Hispanic people, then comes Asians, then comes women, then comes Hispanics, then comes Jews, then comes white people. Right? And we can determine how valuable your opinion is based on your biological membership, or depending on what we're talking about, non-biological membership in a particular group. None of this is likely to lead you to any purpose that is worth following. And finally, communal capacity. So again, the left doesn't believe that we ought to have a community that exists with both social standards and freedom. Instead, what we have to have is a community that forces you to do things. We need a community that forces you to do things. After all, it's the only thing we have left in common. As Barack Obama said in 2012, government is the only thing we have left in common. So this is what the left wants in the end. A world in which individual purpose is not connected to virtue, in which Judeo-Christian Western communal purpose is replaced with classism and tribalism, in which we are told that on our own we are nothing, and in which we are told that our only purpose is to be a cog in the machine of some communal purpose. And this is what we're fighting. And this is what we have to keep in mind. Because America was built on precisely the opposite of these things. The reason that we are fighting with each other right now, the reason that everybody's so angry at each other, is because there is a purpose-shaped hole in our hearts that we are filling with anger. Right? We all had purpose. Society was filled with people who had purpose. People who thought they were bettering the world and bettering themselves, and focused mostly on bettering themselves and their family and their status in the world. And that's been taken away from us. We don't have the capacity for that. We don't have the purpose. We don't have a country that's built for that. We have a mean, nasty country that's built on mean, nasty people with mean, nasty purposes. And we are still motivated to do something, so that motivation is now anger. And so we hate each other. We're enraged with each other. And it doesn't matter if what the other person is saying is evidence-based. We don't even hold facts in common. All that we hold in common is our anger, because we believe that the other person is trying to hurt us, because the anger gives us meaning. Anger is not what gives us meaning. Anger is not what gives us meaning. Purpose, again, is what gives us meaning. Purpose is what creates the pursuit of happiness that we need. It is that purpose that we can restore. It's not difficult. All it takes is a little bit of self-education, a little bit of adherence to a few old-fashioned values, not all of them, some of them, right? A belief in yourself that you have the capacity to succeed, a belief in your own reason, a belief in your own abilities and your own hard work, a belief in the American system that creates the freedom for you to rise up in the world and not to be buried under all of these myths about your valuelessness. And if we follow back the path to our roots, if we follow the path back to why we matter as individuals and why America was built the way that it was, we can have that freedom again, and we can love each other once again, as opposed to hating each other and being at each other's throats. Thanks so much. Happy to take questions. vote. Now for the fun part. As always, those who disagree get to go first. If you raise your hand, you go up to the front of the line.
At this time, we will be taking questions. If you have a question, please file through the back of the house down here. We'll hand you the mic. If you have a question, please file through the back of the house, and we'll hand you the mic. File through the back of the house, please. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, we'll switch.
Hello, Ben Shapiro.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, sir. What I was going to ask was, as many of us have noticed, feminism has destroyed gender relations between men and women for decades. For example, me, I can't go up to a woman somewhere on Berkeley and tell her she's beautiful without being accused of sexual harassment. What would it take for us to repair that damage, if possible at all?
So, I mean, I think that it's important to distinguish between different waves of feminism. So first wave feminism, which is basically the idea that women should be able to get whatever jobs they're qualified for, and women should be able to vote. First wave feminism is something with which I fully agree. Second and third wave feminism, when we get into this idea that women are oppressed members of society and that all men, anytime a man compliments a woman, this is a form of societal oppression, and that all gender differences are social constructs, this is nonsense. So, I mean, I think that I'm not big on dating advice as a general rule, mainly because I was fixed up by my sister with my wife, and my wife was my first serious girlfriend. So I can't speak as somebody who has long and fruitful experience in these matters. But what I will say is that I think that our society has failed to draw any clear standards with regard to what behavior is considered appropriate and what behavior is not considered appropriate. So there are things that we all agree, right? Sexual assault, bad, right? Rapists, go to jail, be castrated, be killed, right? We all basically have this idea. But I mean, all that I can say is that if a woman is so deeply offended by you saying, I think you're beautiful, then she's probably not somebody you want to be dating. The real danger is that we are now creating a system where complaints could be filed against somebody for saying something as innocuous as I think that you're beautiful, which, again, one of the problems with standards like this is it's sort of like Justice Potter Stewart on pornography. I'll know it's bad when I see it, right? I'll know it when I see it. So there are a lot of women who would be very complimented by Tom Cruise saying they're beautiful and would be very insulted by Michael Moore saying they're beautiful. That does not mean that Michael Moore is sexually harassing a woman by saying the exact same words that Tom Cruise is saying. It means that Michael Moore is physically repulsive. So that's... So the only point that I make is that we actually have to have some set of social standards, at least with regard to how we enforce the standards on campus that protects men, but also continues to protect women. And I would urge women who are concerned about these issues to speak with men so we can come up with some sort of agreement on what constitutes appropriate behavior and what does not. Like for me, I have a pretty specific rule, which I have never touched a woman without explicit permission. There's a lot of talk now in workplace, harassment and stuff. I think that's a pretty safe rule. But the same left that says that Mike Pence is approved for not going out to dinner with women who are not his wife suggests that if you do go out to dinner with a woman who's not your wife, then you may be sexually harassing her. So there are no clear standards, and so it's a bit of a disaster.
Hi, Ben. Thank you so much for coming. Have you ever seen or do you know the premise of The Handmaid's Tale?
Yes, I have read the book.
Great. Okay. So I'm a student here at UT and was participating in a debate in my religious studies and pop culture class about whether The Handmaid's Tale could become reality in America. Most of the class argued that it could happen. I understand the fear, but I disagree with the argument and think that the assumption that all white Christian males really want to enslave women in the name of God is an insult to the good men in this country and the progress that we have made together as a nation. Additionally, I think there is zero evidence or policy in place that points to the country moving in this direction. So I'm curious as to what your opinion is and what your argument would be if you were part of the debate.
Right, so my first argument would be the Handmaid's Tale could happen here, but only if radical Muslims take over. It's the only place on earth. Radical Muslims, okay? Because the only regimes on earth that look like the Handmaid's Tale exist in radical Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or Afghanistan. As far as the idea that America is standing right on the verge of this is such sheer and unadulterated crap. I hesitate to even respond to it, except to note the majority of college grads are women. The majority of graduate school grads are women. In 108 of America's biggest cities, women make more, in America's 47 of America's top 50 cities, women make more than men do if they are equally qualified coming out of college and don't have kids and work the same number of hours. Women are earning more than men. Women are earning more college degrees than men. Women are doing just fine in American society. And the idea that, first of all, I've always found bizarre this notion that men are looking to chain up women so that we can use them to make babies. That's always been a weird one for me. I mean, last I checked, anytime you see a pinup calendar, it's not a bunch of pregnant ladies. Like, that's actually not our bag. I think that if you're going to talk about the evil impulses of men, well, you might suggest that men want to make women into sex slaves. Okay, that would actually be accurate as far as the evil impulses of men. But thankfully, we have a Western civilization that prevents men from doing these things because men are not all pigs, contrary to feminist public opinion. Again, the idea that we just want women to be baby machines, I find absolutely bizarre. And I always do this, but I cite my own credentials here is that we have 2 kids. My wife is a doctor. And she spends more time out of the house than I do. My mom worked, my dad stayed at home. So this is not a society where I think we all have to worry about becoming of Ben, right? I don't think this is plus those costumes are so stupid. Really, again, to go back to my politically incorrect point, if men were to run a society where they used women as sex slaves, they would not presumably dress them like nuns. Probably not.
Hey Ben, first of all, thank you so much for coming here. Honestly, I needed you here. I needed to hear certain stuff you said, so I appreciate it. Thank you. The question I had for you today was, how do you think our educational system could be reformed in some sort of way to further promote debate among individuals?
Okay, so, are you talking about the higher education system? Or are you talking? Okay, so the biggest problem in the higher education system right now is that it's a self-perpetuating aristocracy. Basically, you have a bunch of professors who get to determine who their PhD students are. If you are a left professor, the chances that you're going to admit a right-leaning PhD student is a lot lower than that you're going to admit a left-leaning PhD student. My answer to this is essentially the same as it is in all other areas of American life. Conservatives need to start their own universities, and conservatives need to start hiring people straight out of high school if they're qualified. Because I don't have tremendous faith in the debate system that currently exists in America's college campuses, having some significant experience with different college campuses that are not as open to it. And so I think the truth is I think that you can sort of gauge professor to professor. I don't want to pretend that every college campus is the same. When I was at Harvard Law School, I really enjoyed debating with my professors. I had a number of professors who were really far on the left and who enjoyed going back and forth with me. I don't think all professors are seeking to quash debate, but we have to be wary of the ones that are, and the only way to fix that is really twofold: having a competitor system of colleges, or having alumni be very much aware of the professors on campus who are seeking to quash debate and threaten to withhold their money from campuses in which this is allowed.
Based on what I've heard you say, I think you're familiar with Richard Sanders and mismatch theory. Is that right?
No.
Mismatch theory, the idea that affirmative action policies allow students to get into
Yes, it does. Yes, sorry.
So, as a professional promulgator of information, do you have any ideas how we might disseminate that information more widely in a palatable form. I feel like the people in positions of power are purposely hiding this information, and that's why so many people are unaware. So just if you had any thoughts.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a good forum because I'm sure there are lots of people watching right now. Mismatch theory, thank you for giving me the term, is basically the idea that affirmative action takes qualified black students who would be qualified for, let's say, UT, and instead, if they're qualified for UT, sends them to Harvard. And then they go to Harvard, and they are more likely to flunk out, they're more likely to do poorly in classes, they're less likely to graduate at the top of their class, and this does them no favors. It's why the dropout rate among black students at top-tier colleges is much higher than it is among their students of other races, because affirmative action is matching people into programs where they don't actually belong based on extra points that are being given on the basis of race. It's a tragedy, because the fact is, especially with undergrad, it almost doesn't matter where you go to undergrad, is the truth. I went to UCLA and then I went to Harvard Law School. Wouldn't matter if I'd gone to Harvard and then Harvard Law School. UCLA is a plenty good school. There were people from UT who were in my class at Harvard Law School. Where you go to undergrad really does not matter as much as where you go to grad school, and you should have to earn your way in wherever you go, because then we know that you're qualified for the position that you hold, and you yourself are going to be able to stand up to the rigors of academic life. There are a certain percentage of people who will do fine based on the additional points they've been given, but that's not really the question. The question is whether you are being given the slot that you merit in terms of your intellectual earning, or whether you're being forced into a slot where you are less likely to succeed. Thank you.
Hey Ben, my name is Freddie. I'm a Coptic Christian from Egypt, studying here at UT. Really happy that you're here. You're truly a role model for me. I'm studying political science here. And I do have a question, but before I ask a question, I brought something for you. I don't know if I'm allowed.
Yeah, sure.
But it's for you so you can complete your thug-like videos in the style. So now my question is, I grew up in Egypt. Obviously, I'm a Coptic Christian, suffered from persecution. So I came here 5 years ago, and I realized that a lot of people here are easily offended, and and they haven't even been through like
people burning down your churches. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And like a lot of discrimination that I've faced and all that. And I understand there's a little bit of discrimination, maybe some racism here in the United States, but the left makes it as if it's like really a huge deal, and it's like Saudi Arabia or something like that. So my question is, why especially the younger generation here in the United States are so easily offended, and I'm gonna say it's soft.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, as I said in the speech, I think that because people have not been taught what it means to be a good human being, and I think being a good human being means essentially taking responsibility for your actions at root, it's much easier to perceive yourself as a victim. It gives you an easy out. Things are bad in your life, well, just blame somebody else. You know, you're not succeeding, someone you know isn't succeeding, it must be due to some societal obstacle. Now, as I've said 1,000 times, and I'll say 1,000 more, if you can show me a specific instance of discrimination happening, then I'm perfectly happy to stand next to you, as everyone I'm sure in this room is, happy to stand next to you and protest it. But instead what we get are broad generalizations about racism in American life. There's no way to fight that, and it's really just virtue signaling, because then as soon as I say, well, you know, I don't see evidence of broad discrimination in American life, oh, you're ignorant. Oh, you don't want to look it in the face. You're not acknowledging your white privilege. And it's like, well, no, I like evidence for my propositions. And if you are going to suggest that all of America is racist, then they need to answer your question, which is no. Like, why? Where are you seeing this? There is virtue that has been attributed to victimhood, and when you take away somebody's victimhood, they feel as though you have attacked their identity, which is one of the reasons I think that I get protested on campuses, because I say so often that if you're a woman in America, you're not a victim. If you're a black person in America, you are not inherently a victim. If you're a Jew in America, you're not a victim. If you're LGBT, that doesn't mean you're a victim, right? You have to show me how you were victimized, and then we can talk about whether you're a victim. But people's feelings are easily offended when they have invested their entire meaning in being a victim. And as I say, you can invest your identity in, I'm a hard worker, or I'm a good person, or I'm a person who tries to fulfill what God wants of me. Or you can invest your identity in, I'm a victim of society. And however somebody threatens your identity, you're going to be upset. And so if I threaten your identity as a victim, or you do for saying, you're not a victim, then you're going to get in hot water with all those people. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Shapiro, I just wanted to start off by saying that I'm very honored to be here and see you in person. I've watched you on YouTube like a lot.
Oh, thank you.
And
I
you
appreciate
truly
it.
are an inspiration to me. So with that being said, do you think that women who voted for Hillary, women who have strongly supported the feminist movement and supported the left, are feeling disenfranchised given the current climate of sexual brutality and oppression brought to light in Hollywood recently?
So I think that people have a willingness to blind themselves to facts that they don't want to see. And so what I've seen a lot is people saying, well, the problem of sexual harassment isn't unique to Hollywood and has nothing to do with our culture regarding sex, a leftist culture regarding sex. No, it has to do generally with men, right? It has to do generally with American society. It has to do generally with power relationships. It's funny how everybody is willing to generalize as soon as their ox is gored. Right? As soon as the left sees, wait, our culture, our feminist culture that we said that we were going to promulgate and was going to protect women, hasn't protected women, nearly at all. Then all of a sudden it turns into, well, it's not us that sin, it's men that sin. Right? And so I've been getting a lot of this online in the last couple of days. It's you men who haven't stood up. And I keep saying, like, what do you want me to do? And I'll do it. Really, what do you want me to do? Like, if you show me a rapist like Harvey Weinstein allegedly is, then I will say, send him to jail or castrate him, right? Like, this is not difficult. But if you just say to me, you don't acknowledge the rape culture, again, I need you to define that, and I need you to explain to me what I did. Like, really? I didn't do anything. And I think the vast majority of people in this room didn't do anything. And if they did do something, then maybe people should report it to the police, because that seems to me the best way to root out evil is to actually have law enforcement get involved. So the left is, so the question of what the left is doing about this, do they feel disenfranchised? No, I think they're just going to blame the same people they always blame, because we're all in our own little bubbles. Should they feel disenfranchised? 100%. Because in a society that treats sex as transactional, in a society that basically reduces sex to any sort, just a physical transaction that is based solely on consent, it makes it very difficult to explain why it is that the casting couch in Hollywood is bad per se. Right? There's actually, like, feminist theory says that it's bad because of power imbalances, but the sort of libertarian culture of the left suggests that power imbalance doesn't have anything to do with it. If I feel like trading my body for a part in a movie, well, that's my business. And if you say differently, then you're slut-shaming me. Right? So that's, well, you can't really have it both ways. Either it's bad or it's not bad. And if we are going to fight sexual harassment and sexual assault, it seems to me that we have to do a couple of things. One, we have to reinvest sex with value beyond just a physical transaction. It's not just two people who are getting each other's rocks off. It actually means something beyond that. There's a relationship that's attached to it. And beyond that, I think that we need to re-inculcate in men themselves, not just the teach men not to rape routine. Like, again, it's such a weird concept. Like, when I was 11, my dad didn't sit me down and say, son, don't rape people. Like, if you have to teach your child that, my guess is that you got a bigger problem than that on your hands. What my dad taught me was to be a gentleman and to treat women with respect. And that has to do with being a gentleman and recognizing differences in sex roles. Because one of the things that's happened is that traditional masculinity, the idea that it is a man's job to protect women, this is one of our jobs as human beings, as men, to protect women, the feminist movement doesn't like that. Well, then you can't blame us for not protecting women if you don't want us to protect women. Like, I want to protect women. I think men should protect women. I think one of the reasons God put man on earth is to protect women. Okay, well, then it is incumbent on me to protect women. But if you're telling me that I can't even open a door for a woman because this is somehow an offense to her honor, and that if I say that it's man's job to protect women, that this is somehow reinforcing gender stereotypes, then don't come whining to me when bad stuff happens. Because the answer to bad behavior is good behavior. The answer to vice is virtue. The answer to vice isn't just yelling and hashtagging crap.
Hello, my name is David Hamilton. Again, super happy you're here like everyone else. My question is, Prairie University came out with a video. It was like why the left, or how the left is fundamentally different than the right. Really great video, changed my perception on a lot of things. But one thing they talked about was fundamentally the right act from the inside out, and fundamentally the left act from the outside in. And so I guess engaging people on the campus who are fundamentally different than you, like how do you go about doing that? And then also, how do you go about doing that, like with politics? Some people who just fundamentally don't see it the way that you do.
Well, so I think that you have to have a common language. So, for example, I'm a religious person. I rarely cite religion. In any argument that I make, I try to have a secular rationale because I'm trying to speak a language that I think more people speak and that I think everyone is capable of speaking. I think that the first thing that you have to do is you have to remove a self-appointed sense of virtue that so many people on the left have. I'm a better person than you, right? That's why I started the speech tonight by suggesting, no, you're not. Right? All the people in here believe the same things that you believe about evil behavior. Now, can we get down to what we actually think politics are about? If you remove the unearned sense of moral superiority that the left loves to engage in, then they actually have to get down to business. And this does work. I mean, I've done it routinely on television. If you ever watch me debate anybody on the left, it's actually my first move, always, right? Which is to say, okay, we're going to not insult each other here. Now let's have a discussion. And half the time that ends the discussion because there are no more arguments other than the insults. And if somebody is insulting you, I would say that the best thing you can do is just walk away from the conversation sometimes because it's not worth wasting your time. But I think that you have to determine whether somebody is worth engaging or not pretty much in the first 30 seconds of a conversation. A lot of conversations are not necessarily worth engaging.
Mr. Shapiro, thank you for coming out, like everyone else has said. My question is, so you've had former Libertarian presidential candidate Austin Peterson on your show a few times, and you've come out in support of a lot of his ideas and what he stands for. And he is now running in Missouri for Senate as a Republican, and his chances of getting elected have skyrocketed just by putting an R next to his name, even though he's running with the same policy positions, et cetera. So my question is, how do you feel about the two-party system and a possible conservative-libertarian alliance?
So I think a conservative-libertarian merger is the direction in which the Republican Party is going to end up moving. And what I mean by this is I think that conservatives have to understand that libertarians are basically right about government, that government sucks at everything. And libertarians need to understand that conservatives are right, that you do need social networks outside of government of people helping each other and promulgating common values. There's unfortunately in some parts of the libertarian movement this sort of antipathy toward churches and synagogues, that these are purveyors of untruth. Right? These are people who believe in the spaghetti monster, ooh, right? And I think that a lot of libertarians are going to have to get over that crap, because the fact is that without the virtues that are instilled by religion, there cannot be a free society, right? Even Voltaire, who was an atheist, recognized that he wanted his servant and his wife to be religious people. He said they would steal from him and cuckold him less if they were. So even atheist libertarians should probably acknowledge that one. I do think that merger is going to happen. I think it's already happening, frankly. But that's going to be the battle inside the Republican Party, is going to be basically whether there's a conservative liberal merger, whether the Republican Party becomes a big government party that basically just wants closed borders, or whether it's going to be a party that is more libertarian in orientation.
Hello, Mr. Shapiro. Thank you so much for coming out. I'm a huge fan. You're one of the biggest role models for me. I've seen you so many times.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
My question basically is, as obviously a black man, how would...
I missed it, sorry. When I say I'm colorblind, I mean I'm like physically colorblind.
And as a conservative who, one, does not believe in white privilege, I don't believe that exists, and as someone who believes in individualism and does not believe that he is a victim, I'm obviously at, in my opinion, the greatest university, how do I basically combat primarily other blacks who basically call me names, the classics, Uncle Tom, all that jazz, and how do I combat that and basically explain to them how they, like me, are not victims?
So, I think that the first thing that you have to do is something that you've already talked about, which is just you have to say, you're an individual, I'm an individual, let's stop talking as black people and let's start talking as individuals. Now, as an individual, would you like to succeed in life? Would you like, and this is what you should say, right? You should say, do you want to succeed in life? Because you're obviously succeeding, but there are a lot of people who are not. And one of the great barriers to success is feeling that you're a victim and feeling that society is putting you behind the 8 ball. How about try my way for a year? Right? Try my way for a year, where you ignore the societal obstacles that face you, and you just put your nose to the grindstone and you work really hard. And I promise you, there are going to be a lot of people out there who are willing to help you and want to see you succeed. And no one has ever gotten ahead by complaining about the society itself. The way that you get ahead in America, at least in a free country, right? In an oppressive country, then maybe this helps. But in a free country, then the only way you get ahead is as an individual. You know, if someone wants to, first of all, I think that if someone attributes a name to you like that, the first thing that you can say is that if someone says, you know, you're an Uncle Tom, I think the first thing that you should say is, well, no, you're an asshole. So because there's more evidence that you're an asshole than that you're an Uncle Tom. And I mean that very seriously. Slurring people without evidence is one of my least favorite games. And if somebody slurs you that way, I'm not sure you can honestly have a great conversation with them anyway. But I think that when you treat people as individuals, there's a certain seductive nature to that, because everyone in the end wants to be treated as more than their skin color. I think you're doing a great job of that right now. I think I'm probably talking to a future senator from the state. So thanks for coming. Thanks for asking the question.
Hey, Ben. My name's Keegan. I'm a huge fan of yours. I'm not sure if you've noticed recently, but I'm a huge sports fan, and recently I've noticed how ESPN's becoming really left-wing and how they're embracing left.
Yeah, you caught on.
Yeah, and the anthem protests. Yeah, no, big mystery, right? I also got a follow-up question after this, but I'm just saying, why is ESPN embracing that left-wing politics into their audience? Okay,
so I think that some of it is bubble think, and some of it I think is actual market research that's driving them to the left. So the bubble think is pretty simple. Most of the people in sports media exist on the coast. They exist in New York or LA. They exist in big media markets. Those big media markets lean left, so the pool from which they're drawing is a bunch of people who are left. The market research that I'm talking about, and I actually have done a pretty deep dive on ESPN because I used to watch ESPN incessantly. I used to love ESPN. I used to be a subscriber to Sports Illustrated. I canceled my subscription circa 2015 when every week it seemed they were putting Caitlyn Jenner on the cover, someone who had not been athletically relevant since before my birth. And so at that point I was like, okay, if I want to read about transgenderism, I'll get People magazine. If I want to read about sports, please give me some news about a sport involving balls. Kind of went somewhere I wasn't expecting, but you know. So here's what the market research says. What the market research says is that ESPN spends an outsized amount of time focusing on the NBA. They think that's the real growth area, is the NBA. And if you look at the constituency of people who watch the NBA, it is disproportionately black folks who watch the NBA and are watching longer hours. Particularly young black men are watching the NBA in larger numbers. Those people tend to be more politically to the left. And that means that ESPN is skewing to the left in order to pick up some of those viewers. That at least would not be illogical. That would at least make a certain amount of sense. I think it's a big mistake on their part because I think that, number one, I love the NBA. I love watching the NBA, but I don't want my NBA infused with politics. I think black folks are just as likely to watch the NBA whether it's infused with politics or not. When we all tune into ESPN, I think we all are wanting to watch the same thing. And I'm not really that concerned about what LeBron James' message is putting on his sneakers on opening night. And I'm much more concerned with, are these people good at basketball? I think it's a mistake by ESPN. I think they're losing subscribers hand over fist, and I think that they should. But I think that that's probably the combined reason behind the move to the left.
All right, thank you. Now, my follow-up question is, do you think the University of Tennessee should keep Butch Jones?
So I do not know enough about this issue to speak to it.
How you doing, Ben?
Doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. So, I knew you were coming. I was struggling to think of a question. I watched a lot of your stuff, and I wanted to hear something that you haven't said before. And I saw your Purge article about the, I think it was at Idaho.
Oh yeah, the Weekly Standard article.
Yeah, and I know your advice to students is keep your head down. And I wanted to know your advice for professors, right-leaning professors, and administrators. Like, should they keep their head down?
Until they get tenure, yes. I mean, it depends. Do they want to be employed or do they not want to be employed? Unfortunately, there's a witch hunt mentality that's occurring on a lot of these campuses. I wrote an article in the Weekly Standard that came out today about a guy named Scott Yenor, who's a political science and philosophy professor over at Boise State. And Scott wrote an article about transgenderism that basically suggested that transgenderism is an outgrowth of the feminist movement. This was posted on the school website, because they post everything on the school website. The students went nuts. The faculty tried to throw him out. He has tenure, so he'll survive. But it was basically a witch hunt. And this sort of witch hunt has taken place at Evergreen State College with Brett Weinstein. It took place at Yale with the Christakises. It's taken place at UCLA with one of the professors there. So all over the place, I think that you lift your head up, you're going to risk getting knocked down. Once you have tenure, I think that you're pretty safe, and it's very difficult to get rid of you. But there's a reason that academia is so far to the left, and a lot of it is this enforced censorship.
Hi, Ben.
Hey.
It's actually funny. 3 nights ago, I was watching this video of you destroy Piers Morgan, and I was like, wow, I really want Ben to come here, and I found out today that you're here, so I'm really happy about that. So first, I'd like to say that it seems like the abortion argument only became a women's right issue after the argument from science failed for them. I'm only 21, but it seems to me like the argument, from what I remember, it started off as being science-based with like a human at conception. It's just a zygote of a monkey, a fish, a dolphin, whatever. And I remember like seeing images in middle school of them showing like the early development and showing how like, oh, there's no difference here. So, but then through like research in embryology, we find out like the DNA genetic template is there, human, like what you're gonna be, it's there from the beginning, it says it all. So, to my question, in a society today where specifically women have been so successfully convinced that an abortion isn't to be frowned upon, how can we convince young women to not get abortions when the voice of abortions aren't bad seems to be louder than the voice of like personal responsibility and like basic morality?
So, I mean, I think that the first thing is that, again, people blind themselves to answers they don't want to see. And it's our job to break through that. So I've spoken about this. I hate euphemisms with regard to abortion. Abortion is filled with euphemisms. The woman's right to choose. It's just terminating a pregnancy. No, you are killing a human life in the womb. And we should describe in graphic detail exactly what happens when that happens. Okay, when you're talking about a middle to late stage fetus that is developed, you're talking about, in many cases, the actual dismemberment of a human being in the womb. You're talking about crushing skulls and sucking brains into sinks. You're talking about torturing a child in the womb and then killing it. And that has to be brought out, because people need to feel the gut-wrenching nature of what it is that is being conducted. They also need to be shown as many pictures as possible of what a baby looks like in the womb, because there is still you can make the intellectual argument for an embryo having the same moral value as a 7-month-old fetus, and I think that that's a pretty good argument, actually. But I think that the emotional argument is seeing a picture of the 7-month-old fetus. When you know that you can tell the sex of your baby at 10 weeks, which you can, then it's very difficult to argue that this is not an independent human being with an independent DNA, with independent blood type. The more scientific knowledge that we put out there, the worse it gets for the left. And this is why this is one of the few issues where the right is actually moving in the right direction in terms of the polls. If you look at the abortion statistics and how many people actually believe in the pro-choice position, it's been declining steadily over the last 15 years, and it's going to get a lot worse, because the better we can see into the womb, the more difficult it is for the pro-choice left to suggest that this is not a human life, it's just a cluster of cells.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, Mr. Shapiro. It's wonderful to meet a fellow Sabbath-keeping Nazi. So, as rare as we are, we're rare birds. So I wanted to go over a quote with you from Milton Friedman and just get your thoughts on it. This is from, I think it's Capitalism and Freedom. A society that puts quality before freedom will end up with neither. The society that puts freedom before equality will end up with a great measure of both. Underlying most arguments against the free market is a lack of belief in freedom itself. And I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on that particular.
I mean, of course, I think that's true. I think that free markets are based on the idea that you are in charge of your own labor, right? We all inherently understand this, that what was wrong with slavery? What was wrong with slavery is that we were taking human beings and telling them that they were nothing but pack beasts and treating them as such. We were depriving them of their time. We were depriving them of their labor without compensation. We were treating them the way that we wanted to treat them without regard to their wishes. Your labor, what you do with your life, is what freedom constitutes. And so when we say that in the name of equality, we have to limit that freedom in the name of redistribution, we have to take away some of your freedom, then that is an imposition on me as a human being. That is an imposition on what I am. John Locke famously suggested that private property exists because you mix your labor with the land, right? You mix your labor with property. It is your labor. That is one of the only things that you as a human being own inherently, is what you can do with your time and with your body, basically. And for the government to step in, it's so funny, the left will acknowledge this with regard to matters on sex, but they will not acknowledge it with regard to any sort of matter with regard to labor. But if I'm in a consensual relationship with somebody at a job, meaning like they are paying me a wage and I'm working for that wage, and I'm receiving that wage, they think it's incumbent on them to step in and stop it. But if I'm in a consensual sexual relationship, then it is incumbent on me to get out of the way, according to the left. I have a feeling that it's incumbent on me to get out of the way in both cases. So freedom really is the underlying methodology. It's one of the reasons why I've said 1,000 times, people have always said this stupid line on the right, that socialism is a great idea in theory, it just doesn't work in practice. No, it's an evil idea in theory, and it doesn't work in practice. It's an evil idea because it suggests that your labor belongs to me, that by dint of birth, I have a right to deprive you of that which is yours. And that is not correct. That is not morally correct. It is not fiscally correct. It is not economically correct. Freedom is what undergirds your value. Freedom is an acknowledgement that you are an independent human being with independent human value, and I have no right to impinge on that value.
Hello, Mr. Shapiro. My name's Wesley Reed, and throughout, I've been paying attention to politics more recently, and that's swayed me to actually change my major to political science. And you hear all the time racial inequality and this kind of thing, and how they're pushing this as issues and stuff. When I like to look at it as sort of the idea of economic inequality, how rural America and inner cities and this kind of things get more, they get, I guess I don't know how to really say it, but they're neglected more than races of people. And I just want to get your thoughts on the idea of economic inequality and how we can go about fixing that.
Okay, so I do not tend to worry about economic inequality in the sense that I don't think that every economic inequality is necessarily economic inequity. So equality means that we have the same amount of money. Equity means that it's fair that we have the same amount of money. I don't think these are the same thing at all. So if you show me, an impoverished area, the first thing I have to ask is it unjust that this area is impoverished? And this may seem like a harsh question, but that takes into account a number of factors other than just the impoverishment of the area. Right? If I go out tomorrow and I take all of my money and I spend it on lottery tickets and then I blow it all on lottery tickets, then I am poor again. That is not unjust. That is the natural consequence of my decision making. So you have to determine in every case whether the inequality is inequity. And then there's a second order question, which is, if it is an inequity, is it a curable inequity? Is it something where we can step in and actually fix it because the inequity has been performed by someone on someone else? There are inequities in life that happen just because life is unfair. Right? People fall, they get hurt, people get sick, people get cancer. Is that something that is my fault? Does that give you the right to take away from me? Is that an inequity? Or is that just something tragic that happens? So there are several categories here. So when we talk about impoverishment in rural areas, in Appalachia or in the inner city, then we have to determine, okay, why is the impoverishment happening? Is the impoverishment happening because, for example, there's an opioid epidemic and too many people are taking part in it? Or is it happening because there's a drug culture? Or is it happening because single motherhood has created a culture of intergenerational poverty? Or is it happening because people are not cultivating proper skills and assuming that the factory that was there for dad is going to be there for me, and the factory is not going to be there no matter how many times Donald Trump says it's coming back if he just punishes China, right? We have to actually, we actually have to determine what is the inequity that we can solve here, or is the best solution you making individual good decisions and me getting everyone else out of the way? And in 95% of situations, the answer is that, right? Is that fairness in life, lack of cosmic justice, as Thomas Sowell puts it, is not curable by the collective coming in and stamping on somebody else's rights. It is only curable by you making different decisions or working harder. And again, that doesn't mean life is fair, but it does mean that the rules are fair. Right, because there's two types of fairness, right? In sports, the referee judges everybody the same, or one team is worse, and so the referee gives them points. The second way is not fair. It's not fair to the other team.
Hey, Ben. Thanks for coming. So my question is on gun control.
Mm-hmm.
So we've all heard what all-knowing Jimmy Kimmel thinks of gun control, but
yeah, our great moral savior.
Yeah, the deity. Yeah, you know. But
we're not bouncing women on trampolines.
I'd just like to hear. So if like you were president, what policies would you like to see like put in place? Because I know you're for further background checks for criminal history and mental illness, and correct me if I'm wrong.
So mental illness, yes. So there are significant holes in the system whereby somebody has been has actually been in a mental hospital for mental illness, and then they still have access to a gun. This seems to me foolish. And the biggest problem here, honestly, is that the government is, again, really bad in enforcing things. So in the state of California, there are like 30,000 people who had guns and who were on the mental illness list, and the state knew about them, and they had 30 people to police those 30,000 people and try and remove guns from them. Good luck with that. So I think that background checks for mental illness need to be strengthened and made more transparent. I think that that would be the chief criticism. As far as some of the other background checks, I mean, universal background checks essentially exist now, except with regard to hand-to-hand purchases, which is not a gun show loophole, it's just a hand-to-hand purchase loophole. And it's going to be almost impossible to police that anyway, because if I decide to sell you my gun, unless you go out and commit a crime, nobody's ever going to know about it for the rest of human history. So that's very difficult to police beforehand. I think that what I had said is that when it came to Las Vegas, the obvious one is there's a case to be made for regulation of bump stocks because it turns a semi-auto into an effective automatic weapon. But the big problem there, again, is you can do that. I'm not sure it's going to be super effective because you can manufacture a bump stock with basically a spring. So it's not super difficult. And you can also bump fire a rifle if you know what you're doing. So my answer on gun control generally is that the problem is not the presence of guns in a given society. The problem is the presence of bad people in a given society, or the presence of mentally ill people in a given society who should not be at liberty, for example. That is the bigger problem to me. I mean, if you look at the states in the Union, there's no correlation in the states in the Union between level of gun ownership and level of crime. In fact, virtually all crime in the United States exists in major cities, right, which tend to vote blue, right, and where there is heavy gun control. Out in rural America is not where people are shooting each other up. It's happening almost entirely in blue counties in red states, for example. Right? People say, "Oh, Louisiana, really high gun crime rate." Right? It's all in New Orleans. Right? Really. I mean, if you look at where it's located, it's all in New Orleans. So that's worthy of note.
Hey, Ben.
Howdy.
Nice to see you. I'm the leader of a political club on a small Christian college. Me and some of my members drove up here today to see you. And so I wanted to ask you a question that's relevant for us on our campus. What I've noticed talking to students on campus are two trends. Either a very socialistic idea of Christianity and religion where God wants us to share, God wants us to basically not have private property because private property includes greed and all these vices. And then the idea that this world is not our home, and so we shouldn't care about what happens on the earth politically.
Right.
How would I go forth bringing issues to their mind and getting them to care about these issues without calling into question their religion?
Okay, so I am not going to play Christian theologian. I'm not really qualified for that. I will say, however, that there is a very solid case to be made that Matthew's admonition that if you're not going to work, you're not going to eat applies across the board. And also the idea that this world is of no consequence whatsoever has not been held true in very many Christian societies that I can imagine. There have been, communistic Christian, essentially small groups since inception. I mean, really since the time of Christ, but they have not tended to work out particularly well. When it talks in the Gospels about the idea that they were a family and they shared among them, basically, and they shared all was common to them, that is a specific claim for a specific time, and not only that, for a specific group of people. So the way that I always put it is that the purpose of Christianity, at least with the disciples of Jesus, was to create a family, right? And Jesus is very clear about this, right? Jesus is constantly saying things like, if you have to put your father and mother aside, do it, right? This is the new family, essentially. Well, in your family, you're a socialist, right? You are. Like in my family, I'm a socialist. My wife and I share a bank account. Now, I make a lot more money than my wife. She and I share a bank account. When my child lives off the excess of my labor, right? Both of them do, particularly the girl. But she's 3.5. But that is not broadenable to all of civilization, simply because it doesn't work that way. And every time you have a society that attempts to impose this, it fails. The most obvious example, actually, of a Christian group trying this were the Puritans when they first arrived in the United States. The Pilgrims when they first arrived in the United States. When the Pilgrims first arrived in the United States, the actual story of Thanksgiving goes something like this. They arrived in the United States. They decided to set up a commune. Okay, the original Pilgrim setting was a commune. Everybody stopped working. Okay, and then Squanto, who was a convert to Christianity, showed up, and he said, okay, guys, we're going to need to actually do some farming now. And then they did some farming. And then William Bradford, who was the governor of the colony, said, we're going to get rid of all of this, and we're going to have private property, and now we're going to own our own plots of land, and everything was hunky-dory. So from an effectiveness point of view, it doesn't hold true. Also, the idea that you're supposed to just abandon politics in this life completely would suggest that maybe they should leave me alone more than anything else, right? I mean, if they want to abandon politics in this life, then going after my bank account doesn't seem like a real proper way of doing it.
Hey, Ben, I appreciate you coming today. My question is in regards to your philosophy. In your Aristotelian conception of reason, is reason derived from an innate sense of self, or rather discernment within the biblical context?
So it is derived from. I think that they are in consonance with one another. So I'm more of a follower of Maimonides and Aquinas on this. I don't think those two things are in conflict. So the innate sense of self is a divine gift. In other words, you can investigate your own reason, and that is something that comes from a divine place. It comes from, in the Aristotelian sense, from the unmoved mover, who implanted that in us so that we could fulfill our telos. That's a more individualistic sense of Aristotle than probably Aristotle would appreciate. But that's sort of the Aquinas read on Aristotle. And it's the reason, by the way, why Aristotle came back to light. The reason that Aristotle came back to light after centuries of non-study is after his rediscovery in both East and West in the 12th century. He was basically popularized by Maimonides in the Jewish community, and there were Islamic scholars who popularized Aristotle, and Aquinas popularized Aristotle. And it was the mashup of Judeo-Christianity with Aristotelian logic that creates the modern world, is my contention, essentially. Thanks. Great. Well, thank you so much for coming out. I really appreciate it. Good to see all of you.